thinking about race for a second, would you say that there's a perception that environmentalism and therefore veganism and certain kinds of whole foods diets even come from a privileged class that's usually white and usually kind of instructing everybody else about what to do? Is that part of the problem in translating the message?
Yeah, I think, that is a typical way in which a lot of African Americans think about these issues,
Yeah.
well, I think in general, a lot of people have this perception that somehow, issues around, um, ethical eating or veganism or vegetarianism started in the late 70s with, Peter Singer,
Yeah.
this really imagining them as these kind of affluent suburban practices.
Right.
But one thing that's been very important for me is tracing this thread throughout the 20th century of people of African descent who have, been engaged in this type of health activism.
Yeah, that's great.
I think about my own awakening around many of these issues. And there were, black folks, people of African descent who educated me about these issues, who kind of catalyzed my thoughts and interests around these things, from the Seventh-day Adventists in, the community in which I grew up, who were calling for vegetarian and vegan diets, to the Rastafarians that I would come in contact with at the health food stores and, just in the kind of like arts and cultural community. The song that actually catalyzed my interest in these issues when I was in high school was this hip hop song, Beef, by the group Boogie Down Productions, the lead singer KRS-One, hip hop artist KRS-One. And, this was this brilliant articulation of the ills of factory farming, the impact it has on the animals, on human health, and otherwise. And so, from there, learning more about the social justice activism and health activism of the comedian and social justice activist Dick Gregory in the 70s and 80s and up until this day. So, once again, part of my mission as a black man, as a person of African descent who has a national platform, who has, several books with my face on the cover, I feel like I can actually talk about these issues in a way that isn't as off-putting than if it was, someone white talking about them. And I've had people actually tell me that, you know what, I hear these things in such a different way coming from you, because when I hear them coming from white people, they could be saying the same thing, but there's these triggers I have around paternalism, around, just kind of policing my behavior. And so, I understand the important role that I play in these. And ultimately, I'm invested in transforming the food system for everyone. I want all of our children and our grandchildren to have, a habitable earth. I want them to have clean air, clean water, clean soil and nutrient-rich quality food. But when I think about the communities that are most impacted by these issues around food injustice, food insecurity, and the kind of attendant diet-related illnesses, I feel like I have a duty to give voice to many of those communities and help to direct resources so that these communities can actually have a better life.
Have you ever had anybody criticize you for trying to kind of take the soul food tradition or the Caribbean tradition or the sort of African diaspora tradition of cooking and take all the animal products out of it and say, look, that's completely, taking the meat of the thing out of it. That's what it's all about.
The meat of it, yeah. I've had people who I think are ignorant of the complexities of African American cuisine and, kind of broadly Afro-diaspora cuisine, make these criticisms about, my food somehow being inauthentic.
Right.
But, these are people who clearly aren't aware that, many, if we think about just, the transatlantic slave trade and many, the place where many Africans who were enslaved came from, West and Central Africa, so many of those diets were largely vegetable based. If we think about the traditional diets in the Caribbean and the American South, lots of nutrient rich vegetables and legumes. And so I just think it's, one of those things where I have to work hard to educate and re-educate people and help them move beyond their own misperceptions about the cuisine and understanding that, no, this idea that it's just slave food, the remnants of the plantation owners' tables is just historically inaccurate. This idea that, African American cuisine is just like horrible, just deep fried meats, fried
Right.
chicken, and macaroni and cheese and red velvet cake. Like those are certainly foods that people would have on holidays and celebrations. But the reality is, before the industrialization of our food system, where the prices of meat dropped precipitously, most working class and working poor African Americans simply couldn't afford to have meat
Sure.
on
Yeah.
every single plate, you know. And so I just want people to understand that if we really want to look at the culprit, let's not vilify African American cuisine, in which so many you know, things that are black are vilified. Let's look at like industrial food. Let's look at lack of access to you know, affordable fresh food. Let's
Yeah.
look at the many complicated issues that impact the health of African Americans, and not just blame it on, you know, our rich, vibrant, diverse,
Hmm.
delicious historical culinary traditions.